Hello. Before we start this video on chapter 4 still, but part 2, I just want to talk about remembering the difference between these two symbols. If I'm talking about something being congruent, then it's a segment being congruent to another segment. So if I say AC, then your answer should be is congruent to CB. When I use lengths like AC is equal to, then it would be 8 centimeters. So we've seen this slide before. It's just going to be important throughout this next chapter and sections in chapter 4. Chapter 4, section 2 is on congruent figures. Congruent figures are figures that have the same size and same shape. So for example, these have the same size and shape. They're exactly the same. They're going to have the same side lengths. They're going to have the same angles. This is an example of figures that are different sizes or shapes and therefore are not congruent. Since chapter 4 is all about triangles, even though we're going to have congruent figures, we're probably going to spend most of the time just talking about congruent triangles. So if I ask you, are these congruent? Yes, they look exactly the same, but you must be careful. This is an example of figures that are congruent. These aren't. You don't know enough information. We don't know anything yet. So we need to make sure they are congruent. If they're congruent, it's going to have all 6 parts congruent. And why I say 6 parts, because there's 3 angles and 3 sides. So in this figure, 5, 5, 10, 10, 11, 11 are the side lengths. And then each angle's congruent by the different tick marks. What we also have to realize, take a second and go ahead and see if you can solve or unscramble if you want. If not, this is what it says. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are, and then you're supposed to have one more, congruent. So what does that mean? It means that if you know a triangle is congruent, then all 6 parts must be congruent. So let's look at this first picture. ABC is congruent to triangle FED. And if I start with the letter A, you must start with the letter F. So here's an example of how it can be written. Okay, it can be written triangle ABC is congruent to FED, or if you rearrange the letters BCA, then you have to say EDF. If you say CAB, then you would say DFE. If I ask you to list all the corresponding parts, since there's 6 parts, you're going to label 3 angles and then 3 sides. The angles that are congruent would be angle A is congruent to angle F, B congruent to E, and C congruent to D. And do you see how we don't have the M here? I'm not talking about the measurements being equal. I'm talking about the angles being congruent. Next, we have 3 different sides. So if we wanted to start with AB, we would say AB is congruent to EF, and BC is congruent to ED, and then AC is congruent to FD. You just have to make sure that you're checking out the congruent statement. That's always going to help you. Yes, it's very nice to have a picture. Kind of makes it easy. It's showing you that all the corresponding parts of this triangle is congruent to that triangle. I can just give you letters though. If I give you triangle COI congruent to triangle LRN, then when it comes to angles, you better realize that angle C is congruent to angle L. and that angle O is congruent to R. The letters match up. And that angle I is congruent to angle N. If I was going to name the sides of the triangle, I would have CO, OI, and CI. So if I start with CO, it's congruent to what? LR. If I say OI is congruent to what side of that triangle? Correct, RN. And CI would be congruent to, correct, LN. So if I ask you to list congruence parts, there's 6 parts to every triangle, 3 angles and 3 sides. For those figures to be congruent, all 6 parts have to be congruent. Here's a question. Go ahead and take a second and try to answer. Pause the video. WY is in this triangle, so if you say WY, you should say TG. It's fine to also say GT. It doesn't matter. It's the same segment, so our answer is D. Take a second, pause the video, see if you could find the answer to the measure of G. Well, hopefully you realize we have 2 different triangles, DAR and HGE. So D is the same angle as H. A is congruent to G and R is congruent to E. So if I'm trying to find G in this triangle, if I could find H, that would be great. So in this triangle, I have that I know E is 60. So if E is 60, R is 60. And if A is 59, then G is 59. And therefore, I know I can find either D or angle G, whatever's left. And whatever's left is 180 minus 60 minus 59 equals 61 degrees. So the answer is G is 61 degrees because 3 angles in a triangle add up to 180. Pause the video, take a second, see if you could find the value of X. Instead of trying to guess which side here matches up with which side here, just look at the letters. GE is the same as segment AR. So GE is congruent to AR. So I'm going to say 3x minus 4, which is GE, is equal to AR, which is 17. Solve, add 4, get 21, divide by 3, x is 7. Go ahead, pause the video one more time, see if you can find the values of x and y. In this problem, I'm going to start with y. I know that angle B is the same as angle E. So I'm going to take 129 and set it equal to 2y minus 3. I add 3, I get 132, divide by 2, and y is 66. I now know that F and A are the same, so now I know that D here and C here are the same. Again, if you just look at the letters, it will hint to you what's congruent. So I take here 31 equals 1/2 x plus 1. Subtract 1. 30 equals 1/2 x. To get rid of a fraction, I multiply by the reciprocal. X is 60 degrees. If I needed to find the other 2 angles, I could plug this back in, or I know this is 129 and this is 31, so I could put the angle 31 here, could put 129 here, and I could subtract to find A or F if I needed to. So what you just have to understand from this chapter is that there's 6 parts. If any figure is congruent, they have to have the same size and shape. And then every part has to be, corresponding parts have to be congruent. So in a congruent statement, which is this is what we call a congruent statement. The letters match up to the letters, the angles to the angles, and the sides to the sides. Alrighty, thanks. Congratulations being done. Chapter 4, Part 1.